So welcome, listeners, to this edition of our podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about some of our migration and modernization experiences and how we can help you to think differently about yours and get you moving faster. My name's David Ninnis. I've been in IT for around 30 years, mainly in FSI and energy businesses. I've been with AWS for about 5.5 years now, where I joined to work on migration and modernization engagements with some of our largest customers globally. I'm joined today by Gianfranco.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gianfranco, but everybody call me GT, either Gin and Tonic or Gran Turismo, as you like. I've been working in the IT for pretty much the same amount of time as David, coming from the software architecture career path, and I joined AWS roughly 3 years ago as an added member to the Migration and Modernization Specialist Solutions Architect team. And Darren?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Darren. I've been working in IT for, unbelievably, the junior one out of the three of us, 20 years. I've been working with AWS for the last 8. All of that time I've been working with migration, so predominantly DC exits, having done a good number, some of the big companies based in the UK and EMEA. Good to see you both.
Excellent. Yes, it's great to be here. And I think we're looking forward to sharing a little bit of information on journeys that we've been on over the years, and how some of what we've learned and what AWS has learned can help you. Fundamentally, I think when we engage on a migration or modernization with our customers, right? It's often you're turning up, you've got some information, maybe the sort of scope is understood, maybe it's not, but it's fair to say that these journeys are more complex than the average project because of the need to sort of step through and understand what it is that's changing, why you're changing. I suppose if you think GT about when you first step into an engagement with a customer, what are your sort of key sort of starting points that you like to consider?
Well, I personally always recommend the team I'm working with, either the customer side or consultancy firm or other colleagues, that there is a strong need of identifying first the why and the what, rather than jumping straight away on the how. I've seen a lot of time people rushing into trying to define the how, turning up to be a massive waste of time and energy because of not having considered some of the why and the what at the right point in time.
And if you don't get the why, it's almost impossible to quantify the success at the end, because if you haven't got the business outcomes and those drivers at the start, how can you say you can't measure success if you don't know the why you're moving in the first place, I think. Absolutely.
In addition to that, there is also the huge risk of going for the easiest path, which might not be the right path. If you think about an average customer in need of a scaled migration and modernization, we are talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. And the easiest path would be to just move the boxes from one place to the other. Is that the right thing to do? It's always the right thing to do.
But it comes on the flip side, doesn't it? I guess depending on the why, results in the potential of customers overcomplicating it. If there is no why,
exactly.
Let's take the approach of right. We need to modernize before we move to AWS, because we don't want to run a data center in AWS, which is a valid approach. But if it's so complicated, it's going to take 5 years. Are you going to achieve those goals that you set out at the start in your nicely defined plan? Are you going to miss those goals because you're focusing on not doing things a certain way, I guess?
Especially if they are trying to do that, defining everything and executing everything in a waterfall manner.
Yeah.
The risk is to jump on a program that last potentially 2 to 3 years only for documenting everything. And when you're ready to start, your landscape has changed.
Yeah.
Because application have evolved. Off-the-shelf application has received new releases, new version, new technologies exist, and etc. So my personal recommendation to all of my colleagues and all the customers I've dealt with is understand the what and the why, and not try to focus on the how, but at the same level, and thanks Darren for the hint, do not overcomplicate things. What is it that you're trying to achieve? X, Y, Z. Do not try to do from A to Z. Do A, B, and C, because that's enough for you to start. It's giving you a direction of sail.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I've certainly seen quite a few large-scale engagements over the 5.5 years I've been here where, the why may be defined, but it's only defined for part of the business. So maybe the central IT team has identified a why that makes a lot of sense to them, maybe a data center exit, but the lines of business and the application teams that sit within them may have different drivers for change, right? So, you sometimes run into this problem where everybody's ready to go from the point of view of the IT organization, but you then have to engage quite deeply with the individual application teams, and that needs to be a business priority for them, right? Yes. Because if you're asking them to maybe help modernize an application on AWS, then they may be doing that instead of releasing new functionality. And that's something that needs to be understood earlier in the process, so they can work that into their plans, often for the year, in line with budget and things like that.
And that's that the key bit that, to any business case or any migration, I think, is that executive sponsor, executive alignment at the start is what's going to drive your consistent messaging across all of the teams.
Yeah.
Because IT are always going to, in my opinion, probably always going to want to move, because that's, probably more agile from their perspective. But as you say, if your teams are concentrating on developing software, developing new features for the customers, if they don't see that benefit of what they're going to get from the migration itself, what's their commitment and what are they going to benefit from, then you're not going to take them along that journey, or it's going to be full of obstructions because of that lack of engagement, I guess.
Absolutely. There's two factors that we need to take into consideration. One is, as you said, the executive sponsorship that helps get that buy-in. But we also need to be able to highlight and surface the benefit from the application teams and the product team. In case of a data center exit, the application team will have apparently no immediate benefit. So we need to be able to surface those benefits to get a buy-in from the application team. Because it's not just box moving, we are talking about moving ecosystems, moving live applications, and therefore we will need their contribution for a big portion of the process.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things people sometimes forget about migration and modernization generally is, whilst the sort of technology piece, what am I running, where is it, and so on is important, the people and the process, the skills, the operating model, and so on are so critical to success. So I think probably some of the things that we'll touch on today will help explain, a little bit about, not just the why and the what, but how you should be thinking about approaching those things so that you can be successful. So I suppose if you think about, we start with that, what, right? What is it and why? So if we imagine we now have, our clear executive sponsorship, and we have an idea of what it is that we think we're going to be doing, when you think about, how you drill down to the next level, perhaps, how would you typically start, perhaps, with it again? So you've got the customer, you've got those foundational building blocks in place. Where would you take them next?
I guess, so if we've got that alignment and we know kind of who's going to be involved from the start, I think before the how, we might have the why now. I think we definitely need the what. So, what are we going to move? What's in scope? I was talking to and sometimes it's a huge what. I was talking to a customer this morning that, normally you're talking about a migration and you decide what's going to move first. We're talking test and dev, DR, low critical applications. We were having the conversations at a DC level. Which of the DCs are going to move first? And you have to start thinking a bit higher up then. And that kind of threw me this morning, because it was, okay, right, we need to start thinking which region, which area of the globe we're going to be looking at first, what's running inside that, which companies are it going to affect. But it's that information gathering at the start that we need to think about for, what's inside that data center, and how much of that, how can we get that? So what tools can AWS provide, and our partners? What can we get from the information that's there? And that's going to give us the information that we know. But then what do we not know? The information, the stuff that we don't know. I still speak to customers that you do a discovery exercise, right? Which bit this? And they're like, I don't know where that's running. And to get that information up front is going to be the how, isn't it? Is going to give you some of those strategies around what you're going to migrate, and start those conversations on how to do it, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about discovering what the customer has, because one of the things that I keep bringing to the table when I'm having conversation with the customer is being able to identify the level of detail that is needed for the different type of actions that we want to go through. So discovery, critical part. Without knowing what you have, doesn't allow you to remove what you don't need versus what you need, and across the what you need first versus what you need after. But I keep telling them we shouldn't wait to have the smallest, tiniest of the details information before we can progress and make one step forward, once again, setting direction of sail.
Yep.
So there is a sort of a minimum amount of information that is required per each one of the phases. So just to give you an example, which is the same example that I give to my customers. If we are talking about which data center are we exiting first, the first question would be, how many machines you have in your data center? Because if data center 1 has 200 and data center 2 has 2,000, the amount of effort is completely different.
Yep.
Not only understanding the importance of discovery, but also understanding that the type of data can be envisioned like a sort of a Russian doll, where you have the core set of data, which is the minimum amount of data that you need in order to make one step forward, and then you can expand the scope of the data in order to make a second step, and do not wait to have everything and anything before you make your step number one, because otherwise your planning will take forever and you will end up into the situation we were describing first.
Yeah.
So 3 years without doing anything, and you have to start from scratch.
Yes. It's interesting. I think if you talk to migration and modernization professionals generally, you'll often end up in a healthy debate about, at this stage in the engagement, when we talk about discovery, do you need a tool, right? Obviously, tooling, whether it's tools that come from AWS or our partners, can tell you an incredible amount of information about what's actually deployed in your data center, or even down to the architecture of your application, if you're thinking about changing that. But the act of trying to use a tool can sometimes slow you down in the first stages, because perhaps your security team will want to do some work, and they may have a process that takes weeks to kind of validate that in your environment, or perhaps you already have some tooling that gives you half the data that you want. But I suppose, do you tend to, where would you sit on that spectrum of tooling or not?
Yeah, so I would go a healthy mix between the two, because I think as things stand at the moment, a lot of the tooling will give you an immense amount of detail around planning. You look at Transform now, you can pull data in and it's going to give you a lot of information about what it sees by using the data, as we love at AWS. The problem with those tools is it doesn't give you that tribal knowledge of this application. I know this application, and I know it talks to this server, and it sometimes does this X, Y, and Z. And I think without that kind of knowledge of the applications that the IT teams have, I think it leaves a little bit of a gap. What I've done in the past is tended to use those tools to get the application dependency mappings, get those, everything's mapped out beforehand, and work with the teams at the same time and say, right, give me what you think are the groups, and then we map that to this mapping, and we pull them together and say, right, based on your information, this is how we would plan this migration, this is how we'd create those wave plans, and use one to verify the other. And I think that's probably what's going to maybe start changing with Transform as we pull data in, and we're using those to create the wave plans, because it still needs a human in the loop. One of those key settings is in Transform is double check the wave plans and the network, but it's doing a lot of that for us, and I think that's what's going to be interesting to see how it comes in the future, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Now I want to link together the two concepts. So from one side we have processes that could be taking time to get tooling approved and etc. And on the other side, you actually propose two different perspectives, which is exactly the approach that I have. So we have a technical side of the discovery. If we look from the infrastructure perspective, tooling of different type and flavor can help us do that discovery. They can definitely help us do an application mapping, application dependency mapping, which is only direct dependency. Yep. So application number one is linked somehow to application number two via APIs and etc. From the other side, what we definitely need to know is someone that has the knowledge on the application itself. Yep. What it does, how it works, and if there is some logical application dependency mapping. We could be having two applications that insist on the same share folder, and no tool will be able to surface that. Yeah. One application produces a file that is then used by another application. And that's a furthermore reason for talking about the importance of discovery from an early stage and talking about an iterative approach to discovery, depending on what are the decisions that needs to happen.
It made me think of an interesting bit between the two, I guess, because we're talking about discovering the technical details of what we're moving. We haven't spoken about the discovery of the operations, the people side of it. Mm-hmm. Because how do we find out? It's easy to find out whether an application can move. I guess the element of understanding whether the organisation is ready to move is conversations that we have. Yes. You know, how tackling that is a lot more difficult, isn't it? Because having the conversations, I know when I've run our readiness assessments, it's hard conversations to have sometimes, isn't it? When you're scoring an organisation based on their readiness for a cloud migration, and you're delivering news that you might not be as ready as you thought.
Yes, but that's definitely good if you spot that the organisation is not ready as they are.
That's when you want to know. Yeah.
You can still intervene ahead of time and think about training, upskilling, redefining processes, because things will be changing. The way they operate, something they have a physical access to versus the way they operate, something that they don't, with all the additional capabilities that moving their application to the cloud will offer them.
100%. And I think, that's the thing. It's we at this stage in any engagement where we're trying to figure out, we've got our why, we're looking at our what, we're thinking about the what from the technical scope, the skills in the organisation, the readiness, perhaps from an overall governance point of view, for example, where is this the 100th migration that you've done, and therefore you're really confident that you're going to be able to get this thing rebuilt in AWS? Or is it the first thing that you've moved over, and therefore there's a lot of things that you need to kind of just step through a little bit more slowly to build confidence. So I think if you consider perhaps the migrations and modernizations that we've done that have successful outcomes, putting that effort in up front to do the discovery, I suppose you could think of it as minimum viable analysis of the current state. We don't want to end up in analysis paralysis. We don't want to be spinning the wheels for months and years and not actually have anything to show for it. We need to get that balance between knowing everything, which is impossible, and taking a considered level of risk on board by moving forward iteratively, knowing enough. And I think once you can be confident that you know enough, you can step forward, you can experiment, you can learn, and you can course correct at that early stage, rather than perhaps make some assumptions or think that it'll be sort of better for another 6 months of kind of searching around.
I like to borrow from the agile word the terms of just enough, just in time, when it comes to the analysis. Once again, I need to know just enough to make my next decision, leveraging also the big benefit of the provisioning when you want, when you need, use it for how long you need it, that the cloud offers you. You're not tied to a 6-month procurement to provision a new server, and then you're constrained for 3 to 5 years to have that server in your data center.
And that's the thing, isn't it? If you're able to test a migration as you go through, test an application once it's migrated. I've worked with plenty that you've migrated it in, you know, a rehost, and if you don't have that application knowledge that we spoke about, can you make the changes inside the application to make that work on the new IP address, new network? You might not be able to. And then you can pull that back. You haven't migrated anything, nothing's cut over, but you've been able to test that, which is that ability that you don't have with a colo or something like that to go, oh, here's the hardware, it's provisioned. You carry on until that works.
Yeah. In addition to that, you're not just testing that your application is migratable and will work as expected, but you're also testing your migration processes.
Yeah.
Which is a humongous benefit if we think about some customer that needs to migrate at scale, again, hundreds, if not thousands of applications. And I can totally understand the concerns that a customer that has never had that type of experience can have when facing it for the first time. You've done it many times. I've done it many times. David's did it furthermore times. We know it works.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah. And you've actually done it.
Yes.
You were there as a customer.
Absolutely. And we'll make some sort of comparisons, I suppose, from the real experience in previous years and some of the sort of technology advances that make it arguably easier than ever to undertake migration and modernization on AWS. So I think, if you wrapping up on the sort of discovery topic, I guess we're aiming to come out with a level of risk reduction in terms of we understand what our scope is, we understand why we're going to be making the changes we're making, we understand the business value of those changes. The thing that we then move into often is making a business case, right? I think it's fine technically to understand, for reasons of X, we are going to do Y, but clearly there needs to be some financial benefit to you as a customer to actually justify going ahead with the changes. So how do you sort of move then beyond that discovery into the business case?
Definitely the financial aspect is incredibly important because our customers are business organizations. Therefore, they need to understand, they want and they need to understand what are the financial aspect of the operation. But as part of the financial aspect, I also want to include the benefits that they are getting in
That's
return.
what I was just going to add, because you said about cost savings and financial impact. And I I have spoken to quite a few customers that haven't assumed it will be a cost saving. They're not migrating to save money. It's the flexibility, the agility that they're willing to pay for because they know they don't have that at the minute. And I think that's,
Sure.
with the business case, is really important to highlight that it's, I think, early days of cloud, I think migration cost saving was a massive motivator because I think before the modernisation element of it, I think it was more of a DC exit to data center AWS running in EC2. Cost savings would be a given. Just migrate to us; it's cheaper. Adding all the other stuff onto it, I think now customers are willing to explore that kind of.
Absolutely.
And willing to pay for it.
To an extent, it's cost saving because if they had to add the same set of
Absolutely, yeah.
capabilities on-prem, it would cost them twice as much, three
Yeah,
times
another
as much,
DC.
and it's another DC, another 50 people making sure that
Yeah.
the DCs are communicating correctly, and etc. So in the end, there is a financial benefit. I just like to highlight them not only from the monetary perspective, but I like them from the monetary, from the agility, from the elasticity, from the ability to experiment. Is actually one of the first stages where I introduced one of the AWS beloved concept of two-way door decision. For a customer that at the moment have seen only the constraint of one or more data center and provisioning new environment for dev or for test was taking a dent on the amount of compute capabilities they had. Just by having that ability speeds up the ability to deliver to their customers and their market in a massive way.
Yes. Yeah. I think, yes, your point. So just on the one-way, two-way door decision making, I think so conceptually, AWS thinks of decisions as either, a one-way door. If I choose to do this thing, it will be potentially very expensive, very time-consuming, and I may not be able to come back and undo it. Two-way door decisions are, as the name implies, I can go through the door, I can have a look, I can see whether I like what I'm seeing on the other side, and if that's not really what I wanted, I can come back. And I think, what you were saying about the flexibility, the elasticity, the agility, that's what being on AWS gives you, which means you can then experiment. And what we've found in practice is the vast majority of decisions are two-way doors, right? If you don't need huge amounts of analysis because your regret cost of taking that path is low. And so by being able to make sort of smaller incremental choices, by being able to do that more quickly with perhaps less data than you would have traditionally used to make a decision, you can move faster. So yes, absolutely, that's a massive enabler.
Yes. Of course, there is one component which is the per se financial component that is linked to what we have discovered and therefore the quality of the economic projection depends on the quality of the data that we have, but also that is linked to the why the customer is aiming to move to the cloud with their application, because we can do a fairly reliable prediction in case of moving their application in the form their application are at the moment. We can then leverage the elasticity and the agility to start modernizing their application in a form that is more suitable to the way that those applications are used with the compute demand that they need depending on their traffic. And that generates an additional layer of cost saving, which in the end is the primary form of return of investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we often talk about, as you said, not just the cost to run, the cost of change, but also the benefits in terms of, the agility, that ability to innovate and make experimental investigations into new ways of working, new ways of delivering outcomes. We think about the elasticity in terms of paying for what you actually need to use as opposed to provisioning for peak traditionally, and also things like sustainability. In the sense of running an environment where the efficiencies of AWS provided silicon, for example, chips that AWS has built that are more energy efficient, that you can run your applications on.
Yes.
So definitely, as you sort of take that look at the sort of commercial case for the change that you want to make, consider those angles, and then make sure that that ties back to your why. Right? These projects often, when you spoke about assessments, start with what we call a voice of the customer, which is not just looking at the technology stakeholders, but also thinking about the business users who are consuming that technology, to make sure that all of the perspectives of the sort of people that are going to benefit from the change are on the table, and you have measurable success criteria that you can then take with you into the project to make sure that you stay on track.
And as a matter of fact, all the added benefit that we can highlight in the business case are actually part of what the non-IT components of the customers could benefit the most. And linking back to where we started with this conversation, we need to get the application team on board because there will be some commitment required for them. That's where we can highlight what's in this initiative for them to get their effort granted in the entire initiative. So the business case is a very important step, and is actually even more important outside of just the dollar figure.
Yes, definitely. And it should set it should become your North Star, really, because it captures your drivers for change and demonstrates the value that's available to be captured from it. So
absolutely.
Super key step. Obviously, beyond the business case, we tend to think then about what's my roadmap going to look like? Perhaps where am I going to begin? I think almost every engagement I've worked on, and back when I was a customer, it's kind of, well, how do we prioritize? People sometimes think, well, I can't touch my ERP or something that is the crown jewels of my business. It may sound strange, but that can often be a great place to start, because those sorts of applications are the best understood, often the best documented. They have very clearly defined sort of requirements. They have very clear operational capabilities that sit behind them. And what better
and
way?
Additional SMEs if needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, it's that slide, isn't it, between low risk, low knowledge, low impact. Yes, you can migrate it over a weekend. You can migrate it during the day. No one's noticed it's gone. You've also not proven anything because you haven't written the run books that you were speaking about. You haven't documented how you're going to do this. It's that balance between what's big enough to prove our methodologies and to whoever's you're presenting your business case to say, look, we've just migrated this and it's worked. We've used this tooling, these processes, but more, from that, what can we get from that process to say, right, inside that application was Java, a SQL database, other elements that we can use that process to be repeatable for other ones that might be higher or lower risk that might then speed that up. So it's that blend, isn't it, of proving the impact, but managing the risk of rocking the boat too much at the same time.
Absolutely, and I like to take into consideration one extra perspective, which is who's going to do it? What's their knowledge? What are the skills? And once we have migrated, are we sure that we can continue to operate that application and maintain it and improve it and expand it as they are doing now? So finding the right balance between the complexity, the impact, the effort required, the time required to prove all of these processes, building patterns that are repeatable for other order of magnitude applications. So we take them for granted. Those becomes, as you mentioned, SQL Server. It becomes a building block for other application migration and modernization. But it's also as important as this to identify who's going to be the team doing it, building that type of capabilities within the customer in order to reverse back the lesson learned.
Maybe not inside the customer. Maybe they're using a partner or our professional services.
Yes.
How that links through. We have plenty of IT teams, fairly small given the size of the organisation.
If the customer doesn't have the skills, doesn't have the capacity, cannot wait to build up those skills. There's an entire partner ecosystem that is out there to support them. Most of the time, our customers already work with what are actually migration partners, modernization partners. So they already have that type of relationship. And ProServe is an amazing part of the organization that can provide professional services for this purpose.
Yes, definitely. I think that's definitely something I've seen over the years is, whilst it is absolutely possible to go it alone, it is these days often going to be easier to work with a partner who has they've earned a competency effectively where we've worked with them, we understand their methodology, we've seen them move customers just like you to AWS very successfully, and so you can accelerate your journey. And I think often customers have very different attitudes towards IT in terms of, I can remember, the last customer I worked for, there were areas of the business where the technology was a big differentiator. And so in-house we had development teams and all the associated teams to support applications through their life cycle. And we would build applications that we believed made a difference to our ability to do business. But there were other business units where actually the best thing to do was to buy a product off the shelf. Right? There are plenty of ISV solutions available where, if you look across the energy market, for example, you might find there are common tools for managing risk in financial trading, commodity trading, or for managing the data that comes out of your refineries and rigs and things like that. And those are constant everywhere. Why would you build it? So taking some of the experience that the partners have to help you learn where you want to learn. So perhaps the teams that are still building continue to build and they learn how to transition their skills onto AWS. People who are just running applications, you look for perhaps, can I now run that? Maybe that ISV offers a more modern technical solution. Maybe they offer it as software as a service, and I can think about how I move accordingly. It's not always going to be the case that in your data center exit, you're just going to copy paste what you've got. You want to think, but I don't know what you've seen as is that a pattern that rings true?
I mean, it depends on the organisation. I mean, certainly some of the earlier migrations I did were definitely
move everything.
Take it and just move it.
Sure.
But I think as time's going on, definitely, I think organisations are just far more astute, and I think IT teams and probably the partners' involvement with them as well. It's like you say that it's unlikely that they don't already work with a partner that's not doing stuff with AWS. If that partner's there, they're able to guide them on that migration to be able to say, this is the best way of doing that.
Because they've already been there.
Because it's already been done.
Yeah.
And that's where it comes back to what I was saying, you don't know what you don't know. If you're not familiar with the platform, you've got no clue how I can take this database and break that off into other bits, or if you're modernising an application. If you don't know the services that you can do that with, your monolith application staying a monolith.
Yes.
So our customers will not be alone in this exercise. But building a roadmap is not just identifying the first 10, 15, 20, 50, 100. If we have our customer that has 1,000 applications split across 3 data centers, that can be a little bit more complex. So we need to make sure that definitely we identify the best candidate to prove the processes, to prove the mechanism, to validate that the people are capable too, that represent the perfect example. And we build repeatable pattern, but then we have another 950 applications to be migrated. And that's where we need to take into consideration part of the discovery data. What are the dependencies? What are the impact of moving one application from one data center where there are dependencies? Is there any latency problem in the communication across applications that are in our application dependency map? So those bits needs to be taken into consideration to build a manageable wave, and we iterate through the waves. And depending on the partner capacity, we could be thinking about also parallelizing. If we have multiple data centers we need to vacate. What I'm trying to say is that we don't stop at the candidate supporting our customers, and it's not all sequential.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And I think many of you, I'm sure, will have appreciated the differences between waterfall planning and a more agile and iterative approach. We've spoken a bit about minimum viable analysis, or in terms of understanding what you've got but not doing it to an infinite degree. When we think about our business case, what we're looking for generally is initially that does this make sense or not, right? Before you've spent months and months trying to make a decision. If I've got you a ballpark using that minimum viable data set to start with, are we heading in the right direction? Yes, no. And if no, how do we get back on track? I think the same is then true with the planning, especially for a larger migration or modernization. If you're thinking about migrating a mainframe, it could be a 7 to 10 year project. If you're thinking about exiting your 3 data centers with several thousand applications, again, it's often a multi-year project.
Yes.
And whatever you do now, things will have changed over that period of time. So planning, you just can't plan to the infinite degree, and working iteratively, learning, every wave you do, you will make processes more effective. You will add more automation. People will become more familiar, and so on. And so you should get incrementally better, and you can take those learnings to your next planning stage.
And it's also important to highlight that as much as the full scope is vacating your 3 data center, the benefit of AWS will start at the application level. What I'm trying to say is that it's not an atomic operation that until you have vacated your data center, you're not getting any benefit. The benefit that we have highlighted in the business case will start flowing as soon as we have moved enough of that data center.
Yes. And I think to your point about parallelization, it is also that, depending on what it is that's motivating you to move, sometimes you do just have to move very quickly, and that may only give you time to largely copy-paste, update the operating model and so on. But as soon as you've landed your application, you can then have your next work stream thinking about, well, this application could be modernized and set off the next iteration. I think, we've spoken about this lots of times. I think in terms of migration, it is not a one and done thing. It's not like a finite project. I think moving to AWS, you're effectively on a journey to iteration. And as we think in a minute about how we accelerate some of the sort of changes to your application, it's a change of culture and mindset where your applications are sort of living things, and they will need sort of that constant iteration to maintain. We don't want I had that server and it was installed 5 years ago, and there's lots of technical debt, and it's waiting for the technical debt project to come in another 5 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And there are very good reasons that's that's no longer a constraint. Right?
I totally agree. Even more so because we started the data center exit as an IT entry point. Once the entire infrastructure that is needed to run the application exists in AWS, it can be handed over to the application team. Because everything now can be automated in terms of provisioning, deprovisioning, changing configuration. Infrastructure as a code is their best friend at that point, and they can focus on optimizing, modernizing, evolving, adapting to new technologies that is best suited to their needs. And they are available in AWS, and they were not available on-prem. But we are basically handing to the team that knows that application the future of that application.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, between us, we've been in this game for quite some time now. And, the degree to which it is possible to accelerate and automate the journey, I think, with the advent of generative AI, we're seeing modernizations in particular that would have been sort of not cost effective in the past, as now very reasonable choices to make for your applications. So I think it's probably worth just diving in a bit to how we think about acceleration, and what's different today about the moves.
There's a whole sort of different way we can help our customer accelerate in their journey. And I'm thinking about a few scenarios. The concerned customer that never experienced the cloud, and therefore they are cautious to start moving, or someone that's already moved their stuff in the cloud and they are now taking a pause because they've done a big effort and
as you said,
there's plenty of opportunities from generative AI tools such as AWS Transform, if one of its flavors, that can help remove some of the tech debt and revamp their application. I'm thinking from the software perspective, I'm thinking about AWS Transform for Java that allows you to modernize your application from old version of Java to newer version of Java, improving the security, extending the unit test coverage of your application. To his little brother, AWS Transform for .NET, that does something similar with the added value of allowing you to run your .NET application on Linux, generating a further cost saving, removing the need of Windows licenses on those servers. There's several type of acceleration. So in this case, we accelerate on the execution. In other case, we can accelerate on the overall approach.
And that's the people and the processes, isn't it?
Exactly. Where people do not know, where people do not trust, do not think it's possible, through the experience-based acceleration mechanism, we can support our customers from the scope and goal definition, of course, of a subset of their entire migration, through the planning, to the execution, to the post-execution.
Yeah. And it's probably worth just covering the experience-based acceleration in terms of a migration modernization, where we'll talk to the customer about what they have, identify that workload that we want to migrate or modernize during that 3-day event. But it's going to help break down those silos with people that don't normally work with one another. So it's those, away from the technology, away from the Gen AI, it's getting people in a room, getting things done that could typically take months. And I've never worked with a customer or for an EBA that hasn't said off the back of it, we definitely need to do another one of these. Because
Yes.
it's called an accelerator, and it really, in my opinion, has always accelerated things, whether that's migration, modernization, whichever. You're achieving things in that 3 days that would typically take an organization with change controls, red tapes, processes. You raise a ticket for this, and I'll open the firewall port. I'll do this.
When I have time, if I have
Yeah.
time, and
if you're in
etc.
the same room,
Yeah.
you're able just to really crack on and get that done.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Especially for the migration part, where people needs to land in a sort of an unknown territory.
And it's
It
proving
helps
those
them
processes
exactly.
and tooling. Yeah.
First, with the support, with the AWS support during the EBA planning, we help them identify what could possibly be bottleneck or area of risk during the execution. As you said, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
We know what they don't know in some
We
of the
hope.
cases,
Yeah.
typically, most of them. But we can help them, and we work together into defining how it looks, what needs to be done, when, by who,
Yeah.
and etc. And that can be one of the generation of the preliminary repeatable pattern. It could be applied to the intermediate level of complexity and impact type of candidate that we were discussing before.
Yeah.
So similarly, EBA come in a form of supporting application modernization. Again, we work together with the customer in identifying the right candidate with the main scope of identifying repeatable pattern that will allow then the customer to directly experience, identify, adapt what's been done,
And making those changes in that 3 days.
making those changes, but more importantly, learning how in 3 days you can make the changes that can
Yeah.
modernize your application.
Yeah. And that's kind of almost what I was saying earlier about the migration patterns. You start
Yeah.
identifying those common components within
Yes.
different application architectures. You then start developing the kind of initial frameworks of your overall modernization strategy inside the business of, this is broken down, this will always go here, this is, when we see the next application and it's got these components, that goes here. And
Yes,
you
but
start forming that.
then there is
Formal
a
approach.
very important people and processes component to that needs to reverse back what's been learned, what's been identified as a building block, as a repeatable pattern, and make it available to other part of the organization.
100%. I think that's one of the interesting things about patterns. Patterns are definitely an accelerator because having solved the problem once, then hopefully everybody else can benefit from that. But without a mechanism to share the pattern,
Yes.
it's kind of when you see these large migration programs or modernization programs, you'll often end up with, there'll either be a central team that kind of comes and does the migration hand in hand with the app team, or at the other end of the spectrum, perhaps the application teams are simply told, go and migrate or modernize or whatever it may be they need to do independently.
Yep.
So whichever approach you take, you still need some sort of central team to manage that pattern library, make sure it's sort of captured and published and maintained.
Well, and that's where the importance of the CCOE comes in, doesn't it?
A cloud center of excellence or enablement, depending on your
Whichever. We'll go for excellent. It sounds better.
excellence.
And that's the concept of a CCOE doesn't stop. And to your point about after that migration, the CCOE stays around after that migration to make sure that that transformation, the modernization doesn't stop once you've migrated, because, as you said, the journey carries on, and the application evolves, and you want to make sure that you're still making those benefits as we release new services, features.
Yeah.
Is anyone keeping an eye on, what's happening? How can we continue to evolve?
Yes.
Yeah, but also because one of the responsibility of the CCOE should be to be in charge of the best practices, and if the CCOE doesn't know
Yeah.
how problem have been solved, they cannot be sharing those best practices with other area of the organization.
Yeah, for sure. So there you have it, I think. We've been on a journey of our own, looking through, how the typical engagements that we work on occur.
Yeah.
We started out with a little bit of the sort of assessment, the why am I going to be making these changes? What is within the scope of the changes I'm going to make, and making sure that we don't get stuck in analysis paralysis, but rather that we iterate and complete the minimum viable analysis necessary to move to our next step. We looked at the need to build a business case that makes sense in the context of the change that you're trying to execute in your organization. Then taking that and building a roadmap, not forgetting the data that you'd collected at the beginning,
Yep.
from a discovery point of view. And then the accelerators that we now have available. I honestly don't think there's been a better time to migrate and modernize in terms of the advent of things like AWS Transform to remove some of the heavy lifting of tech debt maintenance and platform migrations and things like that.
Yep.
The ability to sort of manage legacy code, be it on a mainframe or in a database, or those capabilities are there today and they're only improving. And I suppose if I was to leave, from my point of view with one piece of advice, it's really just to remember that two-way, one-way door sort of thing, and think big, start small, but take action. Right? The cloud, AWS is here. We have customers that we've all worked with very successfully to migrate and modernize, and you could be there too.
Couldn't have said it better. Yep. Get the information you need, only as much as you need to be able to make the decisions.
Yep.
Go fast.
Measure what you have achieved so that you can identify whether you're in the right direction or not.
Yep. Agreed.
Yes, always.
Great stuff.
Well, so thank you both. We've covered a lot of ground there, I think, from the sort of the why, the what, the how, the accelerators for migration and modernization. And obviously the question for you as our listeners is, why aren't you here?